This week on Quality Digest Live, we examine how quality professionals can transform their organizations.
Plus, statistical analysis separates truth from fiction. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for January 6th, 2012. Woohoo! New year. Right. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Happy New Year, Dirk.
Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year to all of you out there. Thank you for joining us again in 2012. We're happy to be here with you. All right, well, we're going to start off this week with some news. We all appreciate good news when it comes to the manufacturing sector, and this next news item from the Association for Manufacturing Technology certainly delivers. According to the data gathered by the group, U.S. manufacturing technology orders were up more than 80% for the first 10 months of 2011 as compared to the same period in 2010. As further proof of the resurgence of manufacturing in the United States, the New York Times is reporting that, according to the Department of Labor, for the second year in a row, manufacturing companies in this country have added jobs to their payrolls. Doug Woods, president of the AMT, states that increased manufacturing technology orders are excellent leading indicators of upcoming growth in the sector, which makes sense, of course. It means that companies are making capital investments to increase their capacities and improving productivity. So,
good news for us, too.
That's right. It's all blue skies and butterflies for manufacturers, right? Well, kind of. Later in the show, Dirk numbers, always statistics. Later in the show, Dirk's going to be discussing an article from noted statistician Donald Wheeler. As we'll see, data only has meaning in context.
Context, that's right.
And the more context, the better. A significant 80% increase in manufacturing technology spending is a great sign, and so is increased job creation. But mitigating factors such as the continuing weakness of the dollar and questions about the U.S. educational system's ability to provide the type of skilled workers to fill the most technologically demanding job opportunities remain. Nevertheless, hey, it's a new year, right?
That's right.
Time to embrace optimism and hope. So I'm going to be embracing that. And it's great, of course, to see positive signs coming from the manufacturing sector. And we look forward to sharing more good news like this with you in the future. So keep watching.
That's right, and we'll be touching on statistics later on, but this show's going to deal actually in some ways a lot because, well, it's that time of year too. Yes. Okay.
That's right.
Well, also next another news item here. You know that I'm a sucker for 3D news.
I've heard that.
Yes, I'm saying it right here in front of you. All of you know that. So here are two interesting 3D articles in the news this week. The first is from the University of Southampton in the UK. Southampton. Who spent $3.3 million on their new micro VIS imaging center. So among other projects, they have used something like a CT scanner to generate a 3D image of a 8-foot long, 2.5 meter long Pliosaur jaw. Mm-hmm. Pliosaur. It's a big aquatic dinosaur with a huge cranium.
Big sea monster.
Big sea monster, really sharp teeth, 8-foot long jaw. That means its head is like, I don't know,
bigger than
20 feet long or something.
Yeah, I'm glad they're extinct.
yeah. So I'm wondering, if the jaw's 8 foot long, and then the head is like who knows how big, is this like a huge jaw, and then it's like the whole thing is like the size of the Titanic or something? Anyway, they got a 3D model of it.
That's great.
There you go, another 3D story. This one from Texas A&M. Researchers have come up with a 3D visualization of a 17th century Portuguese merchant ship called Our Lady of the Martyrs, except that's in Portuguese.
Amazing how that ship went down with a name like that. Who would have thought it?
Our Lady of the Martyrs, yes.
Who would have thought that would ever sink?
What you want is a ship with the word martyr on it. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Okay. The ship went down actually on September 14th, 1606, filled with more than 500 tons of cargo, including 220 tons of peppercorns, which is why it was called The pepper wreck. Okay,
Of course.
The 3D model of the ship was accomplished by Texas A&M researchers, even though only about 10% of the ship's hull was ever recovered. So actually, the interesting thing about this story is working with a minimal amount of data. Only 10% of the ship that they have in artifact form. They were able to kind of reconstruct this entire ship and provide a 3D visualization of it, which is really interesting. And there are kind of carryovers on this for when we're talking about reverse engineering old products and stuff like this. So this whole 3D visualization thing is really interesting for me anyway.
Yeah, no, it's
me
good.
and like all 6 of you out there. So.
Come on, there's plenty more than that.
24 people at least interested in 3D visualization.
Well, okay. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you for that 3D, and keep us informed on the latest 3D data going forward.
I'm in high def.
We always like that. Okay. Now, let's turn to this week's features. First up is a piece that ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, How to be a Transformational CQO, from a prolific author by the name of Andrew Spagni. I think I'm hopefully pronouncing his last name properly. Now, Andrew has written numerous books showing managers how to lead organizational improvement, and this particular article offered a wealth of practical advice. So, Transformational CQO, Chief Quality Officer. The reason that I liked this article, and the reason why that I always, of course, focus on articles involving management, is because they tend to try to make the complex simple. Management, of course, is not very simple duty for anybody. And the more simple and basic you can make the points, I think the better it is for an article where people can look at that and kind of break it down into digestible forms and understand how to move forward. So Andrew did a good job with that. He talks about the fact that transformational CQOs, who are responsible for quality in mostly larger organizations, really need to overcome a couple of things going in. If they're going to make significant changes and improvements to their organization and be change agents, they're going to have to do significant things. A couple of things they got to overcome. The first thing is perception. And many of their fellow CEOs, the chief executive officer in many cases in particular, look at that as being kind of a accounting position, the chief quality officer. Sure. They say, and the quote I believe was the chief counter of defects and the head of waste reduction. That's the way many times
people view that position.
View that position, yeah. And we know that, and Andrew knows, as he mentions in the article, and he talks about it at length, is the idea that sure, that's part of what it is. But if you're going to transform your organization, if you're going to be a change agent within these larger organizations, you've got to move beyond that, and you've got to be able to communicate to management how important it is to move beyond that. The key is not to really focus on defects and waste. The key is to focus on customers.
Right, and if you do that, the outcome of that is going to be an impact, hopefully, on efficiency and waste and so forth. I mean, you've got to shift your focus to the right end of it.
To the right end of it, because if you understand, and we're going to get to this in a minute, because he speaks about this in a little more depth, if you understand what your customers want and you're improving those things, then again, everything else will kind of take care of itself, because ultimately it's about customers. The other thing, in addition to perception, the other thing that he talks about, which is a key problem and a stumbling block, is this idea of complexity. Large organizations are very complex, and you can have a tendency to want to look at your one little piece of the puzzle and get away from how it fits into the broader perspective, and that's a problem that a lot of times quality managers and chief quality officers run into.
Sure.
Well, there's 3 tactics that the author suggests that are important to keep in mind when you want to be a transformational CQO in one of these organizations. The first I talked about just a moment ago, measure what matters to the customers. I think this is an error that is made very, very often in quality organizations, in any organizations that want to improve their quality, is they think about all these great things we can measure. We can measure output, we can measure defects, and we can measure the reduction in waste, and all these things. All important. But if you don't know what is the most important metrics for your customer and what really is going to move the needle for them, then improving other things probably is kind of a waste of time.
Oh, and a waste of money.
And a waste of money in many cases. Yeah. You know, the idea, again, organizations, for-profit organizations, are in business to do 2 things: to get new customers and retain the customers that they have. It's really pretty simple. Again, simple and basic. So that's the first tactic that a transformational CQO needs to understand, is look at the metrics that matter to the customers. The second one is you need to forge what Andrews calls essential partnerships. In other words, go out to your fellow C-level officers, especially your chief executive officer, of course, the chief financial officer, the chief information officer, the CIO, and form partnerships with them, because you need their support. You need their teams many times, you need their data, and in the case of the CIO, you absolutely need information to understand what the changes that you want to make are going to do.
And their perspective even.
And their counsel, sure. Yeah. I mean, these people are there for a good reason, especially in larger organizations. These are very experienced, very high level, high impact people. So make sure you forge your partnerships with them. And the third one, which I think is really important, is promote an enterprise view of the situation. Understand that an organization is an enterprise. It's a living organism, essentially. And it's very complex, again, as we referred to, and it has a lot of different parts to it. You need to really understand the strategic imperatives of your organization and how any changes that you're going to make as a CQO, as an impactful chief quality officer, a transformational one, is going to affect everything else that they're doing. Understand that the vision and the strategy of the company, and then you can go forward and then you can start making some of these changes. And all these things, all these tactics that we talk about here, you understand, you work with, and you then bring it forward, because what you want to do ultimately is you want to kind of jump over silos, you want to break down barriers, you want to eliminate boundaries, and you want to make a unified whole. Because once you have that feeling in place within the organization, that we're all in this together, we're all a unified whole, we're not a collection of different pieces, then you can really start having some real impact. Especially, again, point two, if you have the buy-in from the fellow members of your C-level.
So he's saying this is really the position of the CQO.
That is.
Okay.
Is to be really a unifier and a stitcher together of things and to see the big picture.
And I would argue he also has to communicate that big. They have to understand, as the CIO, why are you talking to me? What interest do I have in talking to you, or why do you want this information from me? I think a lot of people don't understand that quality is a holistic thing. I mean, even today, even though it's talked about so much, I think a lot of organizations just don't understand the connection between all these various departments, all these various peoples. And that is really, I think, if there is a CQO, that's actually the CQO's fault if they don't understand that. He or she's got to communicate that, no, this is why you count. This is why I need this information from you. This is why your information and your input affects the quality of the product or service that we put out.
And again, circling back on it, and this is why we're going to use this information to delight our customers, retain them, and get more of them. It's all about that. It all comes down to that at all times. So really, again, really good basic information from this author. I like the piece. It was a good, easy reading piece. I recommend that you read it as well if you haven't. It's right down at the bottom of the player page here, so check it out after the show.
Okay,
great.
Good article from Andrew Spani.
Yes.
Another article that was very popular this week was one from our friend Donald Wheeler. Yes. Donald Wheeler, noted industrial statistician. Lies, damned lies, and teens who smoke while driving. A lack of context is essential to propaganda.
Oh, so true.
Yeah. So what he's talking about in this, he's actually referring to an older article, an article that he wrote of the same title, I believe, several years ago, where he was talking about some misleading data that appeared in, I believe, a USA Today article that was drawing some inferences from some data that was provided from, who was this? From a university study, Institute for Social Research, at the University of Michigan, that was looking at the percentage of teens in high school seniors, I believe, who smoke. And they were drawing some conclusions like, well, it's trending, there's more students smoking now than there used to be, or there's been a big increase in the last year. And so Wheeler takes this data and he says, well, let's put this data in context and see if it really makes sense. So, got a little slide here. So this was the data. This is the data from 1984 to 1993. And we can see some trends. I mean, if you just kind of eyeball it, you can say, well, gee, seems to be kind of maybe trending down. Maybe we can draw a downward line here. And we can say that, gee, the incidence of high school seniors who smoke seems to be trending down. But oh my gosh, look, and from 91 to 92, it dropped huge. But oh my gosh, it went up in 1993. It was a 2% increase in the teens who smoke. My gosh, we got to be aware of this and know what's going on. And we were saying, wait a minute, let's analyze this data using techniques that industrial statisticians have been using for a long time. And he says, let's actually take a look at this. Let's create a couple charts based on these points. He says, let's create an X chart and let's create a moving range chart. He says, well, we create our X chart using our procedures that all of us are familiar with. well, not us, but all you guys out there, all that what you're familiar with. And we create a couple of upper control limits and a lower control limit, and we can see that this data never goes above either of these limits on this X chart. Well, let's create a moving range chart. Well, we see the same thing. The data never goes above the control limit on this moving range, range chart. So what can we deduce from this? Well, what we can deduce is that these are just points.
They're just noisy.
They're just noisy. Yeah. And that we can trust the average. We can say maybe on average 18.64% of high school seniors smoke, but you can't say it's trending up, it's trending down, or we've seen an increase from one year to the next, because really these points are all lost in the noise.
Absolutely.
Now the reason he brings this article up, he says to point out a number of things that we're going to look at here in a second. He says, look, we're coming up. There's always things in the news. There's a recent survey by USA Today, which also had to do with, what did the survey have to do? This was a recent one, I believe in December, USA Today, that dealt with, sorry about this.
It was in the article.
19 states see a jump in traffic fatalities, and the subtitle was Masked by National Decline for the 5th year. And he says, look, this is just another incident of the exact same thing. He says, you don't know, unless you understand the entire context, unless you understand where all this data came from, how it was collected, you don't know that it's increased or decreased. You don't know anything.
That tells you really nothing. I mean,
it tells you absolutely nothing.
It tells you 19 states out of 50 saw a decrease.
Saw a decrease.
So an increase, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But overall there's a decrease.
Right. And he says, here's the problem, and this is kind of just general purpose information for those of you who don't work in statistics. He says, look, here's some things you need to keep in mind, particularly with survey data and poll data. Here are just a sampling of some of the problems in data. There can be differences when taking a survey. There can be differences in who was interviewed. And we can look at the slide here I have on the screen. Differences in who was interviewed. Differences in how they were interviewed. Differences in how they respond. From one time, I could interview you today, I could interview you tomorrow. You wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you're going to give me different answers.
Absolutely.
Differences in how the responses are reported. Differences in who conducts the survey. I can interview Joe, you can interview Joe, and maybe because you raise your eyebrow when you talk to Joe and I cross my arms when I talk to Joe, Joe may give you and me completely different answers.
Completely different answers, absolutely.
Differences in how questions are perceived from one year to the next. We're coming up on an election year. So answers to questions in election years are probably different from answers to questions, the same questions, right after the president has been elected, right? Everybody's up. Next time, 4 years later, everybody's down, the economy's changed. So there can be exact same questions, exact same people, exact same survey takers, different answers. And so and there's all this variation that's going on. You don't know the context behind it. And that's kind of Wheeler's point behind all of this. And what's important to know, we're coming up on an election year. A lot of polls coming out, a lot of surveys coming out on the economy, on labor, and all this. And Wheeler is saying, look, take all this with a grain of salt. Understand that you do not understand the context or how much of this is noise and how much of this is data.
Yeah, and there's definitely a psychological component to this beyond just the one that you referred to there in terms of how interviewers interact with people that they're interviewing on these surveys. There's an idea, I think, that the human brain, human beings learn through drawing analogies and through looking at projecting trends.
Sure.
And you do it with very, very small data points. You do it with very little amounts of data, and you build what you call your intuition or your gut that tells you that, hey, when I did this, that happened, so, when I petted that dog, it bit me, so all dogs are going to bite me, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's natural within the framework of human beings knocking around the world. Statisticians don't think that way.
Right.
And it's a very, very different, it's very counterintuitive, and it's very different from the way that I think most people look at data. And I think it's even different from the way that most CEOs look at data. I think that most CEOs, even if they've gone to business classes, and most of them haven't, have a lot of experience, even if they have a knowledge or a passing knowledge of statistics, still don't understand that trends aren't always trends. What looks like a trend isn't a trend. It's noisy.
Or even between data points. I mean, Davis Balistracci points this out all the time. He says, I'll go into meetings, high-level management meetings, and they'll say, oh my gosh, look at this. We were trending down, and all of a sudden we had this huge leap in our data. What have we done wrong? And his point is, well, maybe you haven't done anything wrong. Maybe that's just the noise in your data. Your process has that much variation. Don't respond, unless you know that something has caused this blip.
Yep.
You don't know anything.
Our statisticians are all about separating out common cause from special cause.
Right.
That's really what this is all about. And what Davis is saying, what Don Wheeler is saying, and many other statisticians have said, is that we make changes. Management makes changes based on what they think are trends, what they think are numbers trending up, trending down, and you may end up changing things that are working. You often don't know, and to just go off half-cocked and to start making changes, it could be really, really damaging.
And I'll finish up with this because I know we're getting long on this segment here, but I would point out another thing, and if we can just go back over to this chart here. Wheeler doesn't talk about this, but he's saying, okay, all these are noise. And I'm not a statistician, but I've got a question, and maybe this is what he's talking about in terms of context. Suppose at the same time we have this data, we were able to get dollars spent on tobacco advertising at the same time. Right. And suppose we saw that every time that 6 months before there was an uptick in teen smoking, there was an uptick in tobacco advertising. And when there was a downtick in teen smoking, well, 6 months before that, there was a downtick in tobacco advertising. I don't know that this is the case, but if you did have both those sets of data, then you might be able to go, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't purely noise. There is something actually driving, perhaps, you'd have to look further, but there may be a causal connection between tobacco spending and teen smoking. Who knows? But without that, you don't know anything.
Right. This alone doesn't tell you.
This alone does not tell you anything.
But you're almost certainly right. There are corollaries underpinning what's going on here that you can point to. And I'm sure many people have. Many people over the course of time looked at these things and looked at advertising within MTV and places where at that point, not anymore probably, but at that point where young people were visiting a lot and were seeing messages. Right. So there's always more data. It's what we talked about earlier, context.
We're talking about data.
Talk about data.
We've got going to be seeing a lot of data coming our way pretty soon.
We are, and we're
seeing it now.
We're seeing it now, and we're going to talk about this. If any of you have followed the show, and Dirk, you know this, we frequently have been talking about a segment we call Eye On, and that's information that we're keeping our eye on over the course of time, and we want to present to you from time to time and check in with. And one of those things that we mentioned in recent months has been the 2012 election cycle. Of course, it's something that's of interest to all of us. So, in case you missed it, Iowans caucused this past week and gave their support to Republican candidate Mitt Romney over Rick Santorum by a slim margin.
Now, how slim?
When I say slim, I mean slim. The final margin was 8 votes out of more than 100,000 cast. 8 votes out of 100,000 was the difference.
I think that would count.
It counts, but statistically, this was a dead heat. I mean, really a dead heat. And given the vagaries of vote counting, apparently some Iowa districts still actually have handwritten ballots. I didn't know this.
No Iowa jokes.
No Iowa jokes, please. But given all that, even electronic voting is rife with error. Given this, there's just no way of actually telling who won on an election where you had an 8-vote difference. You really can't tell. Now, this was just a caucus. Essentially, it's a glorified straw poll. So precise vote tallying accuracy, well, it's not really the utmost importance, but it has been.
Right.
Does anyone remember that little fiasco we had with the general election in Florida in 2000? Al Gore still wakes up at night screaming about hanging chads.
Chad is your friend.
Chad. I feel for him. But anyway, a couple of questions come to mind. First of all, is this any way to elect a president? I mean, is this crazy? I don't know. More to the point, from the perspective of quality and SBC-trained professionals, can statistical analysis provide better accuracy and insight into voting results, election results? And you mentioned polling data, not even to mention polling data, which are often inaccurate out to 3, 4, 5 or more % error margin. Reducing uncertainty and eliminating error is what all of us do for a living. It's what all of you do for a living as well. Surely, together, we can uncover the root causes of the problems in our election processes and maybe come up with some ideas on how to improve what appear to be a pretty flawed system in many ways, I think. And a strange way to elect a president. We're interested in your feedback on these issues. So write us at qdl@qualitydigest.com, and we'll air your opinions next time we turn our eye towards the 2012 elections.
And hey, for any of you closet statisticians out there, have some fun. Play around with some of the numbers and tell us how they shake out for you. What kind of interesting things you're seeing. Maybe you see something in the news and you're going, these guys don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah, or
don't say that about us. I mean, it may be true.
Those other guys, yeah.
It's the other guys.
Yeah, and then as the election season rolls through your home state and the primaries or a caucus, you'll take a look at that data and let us know what it comes out as. We're interested in this issue.
Going to be a lot of fun toys, I think, and we're actually going to try to rope, I don't know if we can do this, we're going to try to rope some of our statisticians into maybe playing with some of that data ourselves. Yes. Okay, well, next week coming up, we have another interesting voice of the customer piece, this one on McDonald's. McDonald's has been doing a lot of work in France and all over the world, the universe, the galaxy.
That's right.
And this article kind of touches on how McDonald's is shaping, which is basically a very templatized service model, and how they actually tailor that to fit different cultures, in this case in France, and kind of what they're doing in France in order to, I mean, of all places, I mean, fast food in France, you would think nuts. I mean, how would this possibly work? But it does work because the guys at McDonald's are pretty darn shrewd. Yes. And they have found some things that work. So what's interesting about this article is you can take a template, you can have a method of rolling out your products and services in a very standardized way, but still have room to be flexible enough to handle particular regional or cultural differences with your customers, if that happens to be the case for you. So
that's right. So great article coming up from Knowledge at Wharton. Knowledge at Wharton is running that next week. And we also have an article from yours truly, Dirk. Thank you for that, on 3D scanning.
Yes, imagine that. 3D scanning.
You're a 3D individual.
I'm just, I'm coming at you live.
In living color, yes, 3D.
That probably scared you right then.
Scared me.
Yeah, this is another 3D scanning article. This is on historical preservation. This is probably one of my favorite usages, non-industrial usages period, for 3D technology, for 3D scanning technology. We see it all in industrial use, and particularly in our industry, how it's used to verify the quality of a product, form, fit, and function. But the way it's used in historical preservation is really interesting. This particular story is looking at a 19th century Russian Orthodox church, how the entire building inside and outside was scanned, and how that data is being used to kind of restore some of the architectural elements and the ornamentation on the church. It's interesting to me. So for the 30 of you who will read this, I think you'll find it fascinating.
30,000.
Yeah, 30,000 of you,
yes,
sorry.
Thank you, great. Yeah. Well, great. Well, we'll look out for that, Dirk. I know we all will, so thanks for that. And that's our show. So we'll look forward to seeing you on Monday with another week of Quality Digest Quality Digest Daily. And then next Friday, Friday the 13th, we have another episode here of Quality Digest Live. So join us then.
See you then.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.